and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Taylor Rockwell, once again doing the introduction, because once again I'm alone in studio, but not in spirit, because I always have Daryl Grove with me, obviously. But for today, I had Ryan Bailey, my old goalmouth pal, on Skype to discuss many, many topics, including Manchester United, their season so far, 2 games in so far, what Pep Guardiola is doing to keep his team fresh, to keep his approach from stagnating and getting a little bit frustrating for the players. We also talk Wimbledon and MK Dons. We talk the Crazy Gang. For some reason, we talk about Greyhound racing. Who knows? So I will stop listing and instead just say I very much enjoyed my conversation with Ryan. I always do, and I hope you will too. Joining me on the line now, I've got my friend and yours. It's Mr. Ryan Bailey. Hello, Ryan Bailey. How are you today?
I'm terribly well. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a minute since I podcasted, by the way, so I'm glad to be back on the pod airwaves.
I was going to ask, it's not all the way back to goalmouth days, is it?
No, we did a bit of Dirty Tackle since then, but Dirty Tackle is since on hiatus. I'm hoping that comes back soon. But yeah, I miss the podding. I love the podding. Who doesn't love the podding?
It's a good time. Podding is a good time, including these interviews. But I will be honest, and I hope George Krejci is not listening, I do miss the goalmouth. I'm not going to lie. I find it was a good avenue to write scripted stuff in a way that I don't think I ever have before. So that said, it was usually doing that at 2:30 in the morning through one bloodshot eye. But yeah, it was a good time, I think.
The goalmouth was a lot of fun, yeah, and I think it gave quite good discipline for writing and for trying to write funny things as well. I liked it. Yeah. I liked it a lot. Not that I was funny. And not that George is listening to this, by the way.
You know he is, or you doubt that he is?
I have no idea.
I mean, I think the last time I saw George in a non-sober state, he immediately was like, "Goalmouth? Goalmouth?" So I feel like it's still on the back burner for him, but maybe
was
always
that
a possibility.
Like a flashback? Goalmouth, no, goalmouth.
Exactly. I did make it a little bit Nam-esque, didn't I? Yeah, that was not my goal. Well, I have you on today because obviously you're doing some work for The Athletic, focusing on Man City, and I was pretty surprised by that because I know you are a Wimbledon fan. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording, and basically you wanted to write about Man City this season.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I was very pleased to be asked to write for The Athletic, but unfortunately, they don't have an AFC Wimbledon silo going on at the moment. Apparently, it's not one of the big teams in the US, which, that's going to change. We'll give that a little bit of time.
Well, they are starting an MK Dons one. Did you know that?
Oh, that's when I leave, when that happens, actually. Yeah. That's when I just give up on everything. That's when I become go work in Trader Joe's or something, I think, when that happens. But, basically, they're covering all the top 6 teams this year, and kind of asked which one I'd like to cover. And I thought Manchester City is the most interesting story. I mean, you've got the 3 of the big 6 play really good soccer at the moment, don't they? You've got Liverpool, Tottenham and Man City. And I just think that with the Pep thing, Pep going into his 3rd season, very different to a Mourinho 3rd season, in a Pep 3rd season should give us a bit more fruit. I think it's going to be a really interesting season for them, and hopefully I can convey a little bit of that on The Athletic, to which you can subscribe if you wish.
There we are. Yeah, I think I'll be doing some Athletic plugging later on. But right now, I wanted to ask you, first off, we had Carl Anka, also of The Athletic, on yesterday to talk Man United. And yes, 3rd season syndrome for Jose Mourinho, slightly different than Pep Guardiola, but it's worth noting Pep Guardiola in the past hasn't been one who wanted to commit long-term to a club. It feels like that might not be the case with Man City. It feels like maybe he is enjoying his time there more than, say, he did with Bayern Munich.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's extended the contract, hasn't he? Maybe he feels like it's going to be a bit more fruitful in the Champions League with this team. Maybe he feels like he's got a better run up to getting into the further past the semi-finals of the Champions League with this team. He must just really like the setup because he has extended the contract, as I say. Not something he's tended to do before. There is that theory, and I think this was on Football Weekly this week, where they mentioned it again, that managers lose their effect after the 3rd year because players stop playing to the best of their abilities. They just start playing to suit the manager by that stage. So there can be a bit of complacency setting in at that point. So maybe Pep is hoping he can push past that. And I don't know if you've been watching All or Nothing, the Amazon documentary, Taylor, but it's fascinating watching Pep in the dressing room and the way he must G up those players. I mean, obviously he's putting on a bit of a performance because there's a camera in front of him, but I can't imagine it's that different week in, week out in the dressing room with him. It just seems like obviously it's a positively gleaned production here. There's no warts really on a warts and all production here, but it just seems like it's a bit of a family, and everyone's really positive in that dressing room, and it seems like he's got something really good going on at the moment. I
want to talk more about that in a second, but first I wanted to talk about that documentary itself. I don't want to just keep referencing Jose Mourinho. I recognize that I've done that now with the first two questions, but he came out and said that it was like you can't buy class, or it was classless or whatever. It seemed like that was a little bit overblown, and I'll admit I have hovered over that documentary on several occasions and then just scrolled on to the next thing because I can't quite bring myself to watch it. So number one, was what Mourinho said baseless? Because it felt like it was. And number two, is it a thing that you would recommend for neutrals and City fans alike?
Well, firstly, I think he's 100% right. You can't buy class. And I think Jose Mourinho has proven that by spending, $700 million at Man United. He hasn't really bought any class yet, has he? Well, okay, he has bought some class, but he hasn't really got the class out of the class.
No, he hasn't, yes.
So I think that kind of backfired on him in that comment. And Pep Guardiola has also agreed that you can't buy class, sort of inferring, hey, we're not buying it, we're making it, sunshine. Don't you worry about us. But it's a bit of a disingenuous comment to come from a fellow top six side, particularly the biggest club in the world, saying you can't buy a class in the That's all they ever do. That's all a big side. Even if you go back 100 years, it's all a big side ever did. It's all like Woolwich Arsenal would have done when they started. They just use money to buy big players. That's how you get better at this game. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous, as I say, to say you can't buy class. But what was the second part of the question? Is it worth watching for the neutral?
Yes.
I think it definitely is. I'm a neutral. I'm not a Manchester City fan, and I really enjoy this documentary. Just for one thing, just to see Pep in the locker room. There was a fascinating moment. I think it was after the Wigan defeat in the FA Cup. It was the FA Cup, wasn't it, last season? Or was it the League Cup? Whichever cup it was.
One of them cups, yeah.
He was in there going, I'm sorry, this is all my fault. I know I should be better. I should be better than this. He didn't hang out a single player for that performance. He put it all on himself. And there's several moments like that where he's a bit, maybe, as I say, maybe he's doing it for the camera, but he's very much, he puts all the blame on himself, and he never hangs out a player when it comes to the press conferences. He protects them all. I think that comes across very well in the documentary. And also, it's just a really slick production. It's a really enjoyable 45 minutes. There's 8 of them. And you know, it's like, I don't know if you watch Hard Knocks at all. It feels like Hard Knocks, but with better production values. Admittedly, they've had more time to put it together than Hard Knocks, but better production values, and it's about a far, far superior sport. So what's there not to love about it?
I think it's also, for me, it also is like a good reminder of how intelligent City have been in kind of building their global brand. Because I think initially it was, we just got to get that one big signing. So you spend that money, you get Robinho, maybe that's a statement of intent. But the thing that like always resonated with me from those first few seasons, when Sheikh, I forget his name, took over, is that like I remember like they were all wearing like very stylish polos, and they all had these branded watches from Man City, and it felt very branded, that they were trying to create this new brand, this new look, this new approach. It feels like this documentary continues that, of they're not just trying to go out and buy players, win titles. It's also an attempt to make City into one of those larger global brands that gives you more permanent residence than just continuing to buy players. Is that a thing that you would agree with, or am I just kind of reaching for why you would make a documentary about your own team?
I think I kind of agree with that, but I think I think the documentary shows the evolution in that approach. When the City project, I hate using the word project, but when sort of 2008ish, when Shinawatra was out and the new owners came in, you had the chairman Gary Cook, the former Nike CEO, or he was high up in Nike, and he was saying things like, "I want people in Asia to be using Man City toothbrushes and riding Man City motorbikes." And, you know, really wanted to go like full Coca-Cola with this brand. And, you know, it's scaled down a little bit from that. And as a side, by the way, there's a pub in New York City called the Mad Hatter, where a few years ago, where I was working for a YouTube channel there, we filmed Gary Cook giving a speech to Man City fans. I think it was at the start of a season. And he was quite inebriated. Oh. And basically the City PR came up to us and said, no, you can't use that. You can't use any of that, because it was just after he'd been let go by City, and it wasn't very complimentary. But anyway, that's an aside. We've gone from that Gary Cook era to Khaldun Al-Mubarak being the chairman. And when you watch him on this documentary, I don't know if you haven't seen it yet. He's got the most soothing and calming voice ever. I'd listen to him say anything to me. He could describe the most horrible catastrophe, and I'd be like, "Oh, Khaldoon, that's okay." Just when he's talking about Alexis Sanchez not coming to City, it's like, we identified a target. The target didn't come through. We decided it wasn't best for us at that time. And he just sounds so assured. It's like, that's what I want in a leader. He sounds fantastic. And obviously he's doing all the branding and all the corporate stuff. And we've got these Man City wristbands they're trying to sell people at the moment. All that kind of jazz is still happening. But the whole process feels a bit more refined than we want people to use Man City toothbrushes in Asia.
All right, that sounds like slightly hypnotizing. British American pundits. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty like more refined. I like that approach. I also liked the idea of Guardiola blaming himself because you said earlier, like the third season, it's about how do you keep players motivated, how do you keep them happy and performing at that next level, and I think. One of the things it feels like this season has been Guardiola not maybe like still obviously being very intense. He's always going to be an intense person. But like I think back to this weekend with David Silva's son being there and the way he was like trying to like make cooing noises at David Silva's son in the post-match like press conference and just little things like that. It feels like he is trying to maybe keep it, as you said, more of like a family atmosphere than I'm going to berate my players and try to drive them to this next level, because I feel like so often that ends up backfiring and kind of blowing up in the manager's face.
Well, I think that's something this documentary also shows you. I get the impression when I think of a top Premier League or top European side that it's a bunch of millionaires, all got agents, they're all self-interested. But you see how they interact together and how, they do have friendships. And there are these small parts, there are small gestures that are made by the manager. And there are bit players in their lives who are, they might seem like bit players to us, like the physios who are working on Fabian Delph, or one of the biggest characters in this show, and it's probably been made quite deliberate, is the kit man, the guy who sorts out the boots. He does the boot room and he helps with the kits and whatnot, lays them out in the dressing room. Is this Manchester local lad? I don't have his name on the top of my head right now, but he's he joined the club when he came straight from school, basically, and they kept him on full time. And he's like everyone's best friend. When I think it's Benjamin Mendy's going in for his cryogenic freezing, when they go in the really cold, not cryogenic freezing, he's not freezing his body for science. When they go in the really cold room to stimulate the muscles.
It was weird to me that last week it was just Benjamin Mendy's head rolling around the field. But yeah, I'm still with you.
Yeah, he's a head in a jar Futurama style is what's going to be in the future. But he takes the kit man in with him, and they're doing all these pre-match rituals with him and stuff. And it's like, there's all these millionaire personalities in there, but it's the small people doing the smaller jobs that are really important. They're the people these players see every day and work with every day. And it's all the physios and the health consultants and the kit men and stuff. And it's really interesting seeing all that stuff come together in a big club like Man City. Well, it's interesting to me anyway. It might not be interesting to other people, but that's one of the reasons I liked it.
Well, at the very least, you've talked me into watching it, which is kind of a big ask. So there you go.
Also,
well done, my friend. If
you've got a Prime membership, you got to make the most of it, haven't you?
Of course.
Otherwise, you're just going to keep buying stuff on Amazon to try and make that postage cost per delivery go down. You've got to watch some Prime.
That hit too close to home for me. Just then, I totally do that all the time. I'm like, but if I spend $7 more, I get $2 in free shipping. Perfect.
I've got a real problem there too.
All right, so we should well, I guess it transitions into, speaking of buying things, I was kind of surprised by City's approach to the transfer window this season, bringing in Riyad Mahrez for a decent sum of money, and that was basically it. They had some departures. They continue to have some departures. I think Jason Denayer yesterday. Were you surprised by the business they did? Because I think there was some expectation that maybe they would bring in some competition for Fernandinho or some replacements at center back. Instead, it seems like they've kind of stuck firm with what they had.
Yeah, I mean, there is the argument they could have made a bit more strength in the middle. Maybe it's a defensive midfield area a little bit. Maybe David Silva, you plan for his departure in the future, that kind of thing. But I'm not terribly surprised. I mean, there wasn't an abundance of rumours floating around Man City transfers. And when you look at their squad last season, you couldn't get much better than that. And there's an argument to be made with City as there is with Tottenham. Yes, Tottenham didn't spend anything and City only bought a player in a position where they already have a decent amount of cover. But there's an advantage to keeping the same squad that you had season on season in that, there's going to be no bedding in for new players. They're going to hit the ground running, and evidently they have. I think Mahrez, I was very skeptical about that transfer when it first went through, because I was just thinking Mahrez has just taken the money here. He's gonna be a League Cup player. He's gonna be like Danny Drinkwater at Chelsea, isn't he? He's just gonna not play a part, and it's gonna be a shame because it's nice to see his talent. He's a very talented, creative player, but it does appear thus far that Pep does have some faith in him. I mean, he started all the in International Champions Cup games, Community Shield. He was in the Arsenal game to start off, and he's been making some sub appearances here and there. So it suggests he will be used, or it suggests that Pep's still kind of resting his World Cup stars. So I'm not quite sure. But either way, I think it's a pretty good move now. And it does seem that rotation is going to be big for this squad this season, because what's important with City is there's no steadfast, cemented number one starting 11. They've started several different formations already this season. There's been several different starting 11s, whether De Bruyne's injuries forced that or not. So it's interesting to see how much Pep is playing with the formula, I think.
Hello, everyone. This is Taylor cutting in to let you know about today's sponsor, Roughneck Scarves, the official scarf provider of Major League Soccer, USL, the NCAA, and US Soccer. Lots of good organizations covered there. They are also the custom scarf maker of the Total Soccer Show scarf. They did the scarves for the World Cup Comedy Tour. We have lots of experience with Roughneck Scarves, and we love them. So we did ask, given the conversation with Ryan Bailey, we asked people on Twitter if they were to design a custom Roughneck scarf, what would they use to represent the possible outcomes of Manchester City's season? We got a lot of very good responses. They varied in their approach, is how I'm going to put that one. At Jonathan Failer said Pep, Aguero, De Bruyne atop a mountain, with Kane, Salah, and others climbing menacingly towards the top. Yeah, menacingly. At soccer_rabbi went with an 800-pound gorilla, a wrecking ball, Marvel supervillain the Juggernaut, and Godzilla, all riding pale horses of the apocalypse. At _soccer thoughts said on one end it would be Pep holding the UEFA Champions League title, because my goodness does he want it, and on the other it would be Taylor, that's me, sobbing into a Man United jersey. That's accurate. At Phil Z-Man says City as the Spanish Armada, cruising towards trophies, especially the UEFA Champions League. All right, we got a little bit of a trend there. With Liverpool as the English Navy and a forlorn Mourinho sinking into the distance. Sigh. And final one, at J_Stoli has gone for Pep on one side, telling it how it is in the locker room, and on the other, him defending his players to the death. Thanks, Amazon, says Jay. I think Ryan would agree with that. I think I agree with that, but I'm going to withhold judgment until I actually watch the documentary. I think I'm going to have to do that. It does sound pretty intriguing, as do all of these scarf options. If you wanted to get yourself a scarf, but you didn't feel like paying full price, then we've got you covered. If you go to roughneckscarves.com, that's RUFFNECK scarves.com, and use the discount code Total Soccer Show, you will get 20% off your order. So roughneckscarves.com, Total Soccer Show, all one word, to get 20% off your order. The link will be in the show notes, as always. And with that said, let's get back to me and Ryan. Yeah, and I think that's again part of what makes Pep Guardiola so intelligent, and I guess City's approach overall so intelligent, in my opinion, is that if you do have a team, even with all the talent they have, if you build it around, say, Kevin De Bruyne, and you don't rotate that much, and you kind of have this reliance on maybe 3 or 4 core players, if one of them goes down, even if you still have all the money and all these players, it can be so disruptive to just overall flow and team chemistry. And the idea of maybe like at the same time rotating, at the same time then reminding everybody like, hey, your position isn't guaranteed. It also makes it so that if somebody is out for 3 months for Kevin De Bruyne?
Yeah, 3 months.
It makes it so that you can sort of bring in replacements or have players play different positions, and it seems like it works. And that, I guess, leads into the article you wrote today for The Athletic about maybe the importance of Bernardo Silva for Man City this season. Glorious segue. I do what I do, my friend. Yes. I do what I do.
Yeah, basically the piece I wrote for The Athletic this week was about the fact that De Bruyne's injury is a bad thing for the player, but also it has a silver lining. Not only does De Bruyne get some rest because he's played pretty grueling last season, 11 months, 57 games for City, went straight into the World Cup. I think I worked out it was 29 days from the third place playoff in the World Cup to the Arsenal game, the first game of the Premier League season, and he's been having to do pre-season training in between those 29 days as well. So it's giving him some rest, but also it's letting other players shine, and in particular Bernardo Silva, who has been played very, very different places by Pep, and he's comfortable doing so. I mean, the Huddersfield game, he played right wing back basically with Mendy on the other side, and he can play on the right midfield where Sterling or Riyad Mahrez now can play. But arguably his most comfortable position, and the position in which he shined at Monaco, was in that number 10 role, that creative role in the middle, the De Bruyne kind of role, if you will. And I think that Silva's going to profit from this very well. He's going to be used a bit more. If you look at the Community Shield, afterwards Pep said, "My team is Bernardo Silva plus 10." And that says a lot for a player who was basically used as a bit part sub for most of last season. He made 20 sub appearances out of, I think, 35 games he played in the Premier League last season. So to go from that to being it's him plus 10, I think says a lot about the intentions for using him this season. And the kind of point I made in this article is that when Kevin De Bruyne is back from this injury, you're talking November, December time, he's not necessarily going to stroll straight back into that position. I think there could be a way where Silva and De Bruyne are used together in the middle somehow. Maybe Silva gets used in that sort of Gundogan-y kind of less creative role, or maybe he's back out on the right. I think they could work together, but I don't think it's absolutely set in stone that De Bruyne walks straight back in. And that's the beauty of this Man City team. Even with their best player out, they're good.
Well, they're good. I'd say 6-1 over Huddersfield, and the way they've started the season, yeah, good indicators that they're good. I have to say, good indicators that Ryan Bailey and I can be friends. I did just go back and Control F search your article. You avoided the temptation to write Silva lining, and I really appreciate that. I feel like that might have been a struggle.
Oh no! If I'd have known that, I would have totally done that. You know how much I love puns.
You and Daryl, man. You and Daryl and the puns. Another question I had for you about City was they feel for me right now similar to like the Barcelona, like the teams of, I guess, Guardiola, of like those late 2000s teams that just the way they seem to kind of roll over opposition to dominate. And I think the thing that really makes them seem familiar is I don't quite know how this doesn't consistently end in them challenging for or winning the title and challenging for the Champions League. Does it feel like this is going to be a kind of sustained machine for at least another couple of years to you?
Yeah, I think at least for another couple of years. As we all know, soccer is cyclical and what goes up must come down, blah, blah, blah. They're never going to dominate for the rest of time. But it does feel like, the run for the Champions League is getting closer and closer. They're getting more and more pedigree in this competition, and Pep only helps with that pedigree, of course, and the nature of the players they've got who've gone deep in the competition as well. I think the comparison I actually made in another Athletic article I wrote, I made the comparison with that Barcelona side. I think it was the 29-10 side. That was the one that was sort of deemed as the greatest side, the one that Sir Alex Ferguson said was the best side he'd ever played against, which says a lot for a man who's played against a lot of elite sides. And I kind of worked out, I wanted to see how much that side actually lost. And in that in that season in all competitions, they lost 5 games, that Barca side of 2009-10. And I kind of ran with that. And I picked the 5 games I think City will lose this season, because I think there's a lot of parallels between that side and this, in that they've had a few years run up to it with Pep Guardiola and so on. And I think they could go, be just as successful. But they're going to lose games. It's inevitable. We saw the breakdown of that incredible run they went on last season. Crystal Palace was where the wheels came off at the end. It's not necessarily where you expect the wheels to come off. But I did pick out the 5 games, which I can reveal for you now if you'd like.
Yeah, that's right.
So the 5 games.
This is such a good article. We talked about this on the show.
Oh, you did actually. Yeah, one of my friends who listens mentioned that. Yeah, thank you very much for that. So the 5 games I picked out were a Premier League game, which I think was going to be against Liverpool. We saw Liverpool were one of the teams who sort of figured them out last season. I think they're probably going to figure them out this season too. The next game is what I called the rainy Tuesday night in Stoke. Stoke have departed the Premier League, obviously, so we need a new Stoke. Who's going to be that new Stoke? I did argue it could be Crystal Palace. We've seen how hard they are to break down at home, but I think their game, not quite in that rainy Tuesday night avenue because of where it falls in the season. Also with Wolves, I think that's coming up pretty soon. So that's that one that could be a stumbling point, but I didn't pick that one. What I went for was Huddersfield. And I did write this before they battered them 6-1, to be fair.
I was going to ask.
But Huddersfield at home I think they hadn't conceded in 3 of their last 4 games in which they faced Man City at home at the John Smith Stadium. So that was my logic there, and it comes right in that difficult winter time. It's at the end of January, this game, when they're going to be needing to rotate, they're going to be needing to think about the Champions League. That was where I thought, if they're going to go on a run, John Smith Stadium's where it's going to happen. That's where it's going to come the wheels fall off. Next game I went for was an early round League Cup game. We've seen that, competing on 4 fronts is pretty impossible. It's very hard to do, at least. It's not impossible. It's very, very hard to do. So I picked, they're going to throw it away with a weakened side against, another League One side. Probably Wigan again. They love losing to Wigan, don't they? Seems to be the thing they do. Very charitable for those fellow Greater Manchester teams.
That's so kind of them.
I also picked out a meaningless Champions League game, kind of echoing what they did last season when I think they threw away the last group game. And the final one I went for, the most painful of all, Taylor, the Champions League semi-final.
You think
it's
again?
Going to be the semi-final stage, and I've just got it written in my head. It's going to happen at the Camp Nou as well. That's how I feel it's going to happen. I mean, predictions are a fool's game, as you well aware, and it's something I do a lot in my writing. But I feel like this is a fairly logical 5 games they could lose, and they could very well win the Champions League this season. But at the same time, it's kind of a coin toss when it gets to the Final Four, isn't it? When you look at the quality of the Final Four.
Yeah, it's also, though, this is where, my one, it's not even a criticism. It's just a weird Pep Guardiola ism, is that in those types of games where it seems like he has more of a vested interest than usual, where it feels like he has a personal stake, he, I think, overthinks. I think this would be a good example of this would be with Bayern Munich when he tried to do full pitch man marking for a half, and that kind of blew up in his face. I think it happened to him once with Barcelona. It happened to him, I would argue, with City against Liverpool last season. It feels like every now and then he has these games where he just makes it too complicated. He loses the simplicity of the system, and it kind of melts down a little bit for them. And it does feel like that is a Champions League semifinal against Barcelona. Feels like it has all the familiar symptoms of Guardiola tinkering just a little bit too much. Yeah,
definitely. And just such fine margins when it comes to those 2-leg semi-final games as well, isn't it? And the one I think of is, say, the Real Madrid, was it 2 seasons ago when they faced Bayern Munich in the semi? And it just seemed like every decision went against Bayern.
Yep.
And, when that kind of thing happens, when the chips don't fall in your favour, then, it only takes that much to not make the final. It's rough.
Right. So Ryan Bailey guaranteeing Barcelona in the final of the Champions League this season is what I heard.
I guess that's what I just did, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, that's good. It's all the more predictions. So you can bet on everything Ryan said. And if it doesn't come good, he'll reimburse you. It's a nice guarantee that you've made.
And if it does, send me the commission.
I didn't think about that. All right, yeah, see? It all works out. Perfect. So obviously you're going to continue to be covering Manchester City this season. Are there any other things that you're going to be looking for, either in documentaries or social media or just on the field? Because it does feel like City, I'm not trying to say it's it. They've won the title again, because I do think Liverpool are going to cause problems. I think Tottenham may cause them problems too. Are there things you're going to be looking for away from just, they won 2-0, they won 3-0? Is it about how they do it? Is it about who scores and how many players are getting involved? Or is it just sort of covering a juggernaut that seems to be a juggernaut at this point in the season?
Well, I suppose a little bit of all of that. I think what I'm most interested in is how Pep uses his players, how he uses that abundance of midfield talent that he's got. And the formations, we know he loves a 4-3-3, but we saw it mixed up against Huddersfield. We've seen it mixed up many times in the past. I'm just fascinated at how, lots of managers, successful managers, they find a formula and they stick to it. Whereas Pep, his formula is a bit more complex than that, and he can change various factors within it. And that's what fascinates me about him. And by the way, one of the great things about the documentary, the All or Nothing documentary, is watching Pep with the tactical whiteboard, and he's moving the little checker markers around it. It's like a beautiful mind. He does it at 500 times pace you'd expect. He's moving them around really quickly, and he's explaining to everybody, you go here, you go here, you go here. And sometimes he's just doing it on his own to figure out the movements in his own head, it seems. it's just beautiful to watch him planning out how a game's going to go. It's wonderful.
What do you think his patience level is in terms of, like, if I were watching that, I would probably be like, wait, where do I go? Like, do you think, is he okay with that? Is he okay with a player being like, hold on, I'm confused? Does he expect them to have, like, perfect retention? Or is that part of his brilliant coaching philosophy, is there are no stupid questions?
Well, this is something I'm really interested in. I'm glad you brought this up, actually, because a lot of Pep's team talks or talks on the training ground take place in like these lecture theatres, which is something that a lot of Premier League and big sides do as well. And Pep's very excited. You know, he's a very animated person. He's crouching down 1 second, he's jumping up in the air the next, and he talks very quickly in a language which is not his native language to people who are the majority of the room. English isn't their native language either. And I'm sitting there with my lovely noise cancelling headphones on, and I can't quite understand what Pep's saying some of the time. So I'm thinking, if I'm a German player, if I'm a Spanish player, and I'm hearing him rattle on in English, I might say, you know, he does this lovely half-hour presentation, put my hand up at the end and say, what did you want me to do in minute 13? What was that? Sorry, I didn't quite grasp that, because it must be an issue. It must be an issue. And it must be reasons why a manager like him gets frustrated with players not following orders, because, you know, I'm sure, you know, it's not just that lecture theatre where they get their orders. It's where they may be introduced. But there must be some breakdown in communication. It's inevitable, surely, isn't it, across the language barriers?
I mean, I think so, because, like, I'm not saying this is, like, their level of language, any of the players, but, like, when it comes to me understanding Spanish at this point, like, I took a lot of Spanish. It's kind of faded. And so, I'll listen to stuff and sort of grasp the words I do understand and then put them together in a sentence. And I just imagine him very quickly saying, you know, whatever we do, don't follow the guy in the red shirt. If you follow the red shirt, you've done the wrong thing. And me not quite understanding that, being like, red shirt, got it, follow that guy. And then suddenly things are bad. So yeah, it is a really interesting idea of how do you convey that and make sure that it sinks in.
I mean, on the same, we can say that's an issue, but at the same way, you look at Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United for
the most clear-spoken man in history.
No one understands a single word he said. Great lads, you're a goal, right back, goal. That's about all you get.
Yep. You're right. So maybe it's just about, like, the air of enthusiasm and authority that just like resonates. There we go. All right.
Just go out there, as Harry Redknapp famously said, just go out there and effing run about a bit.
Harry Redknapp, Pep Guardiola, basically the same person. That's what I've always said.
And another thing in his documentary is one of Pep's verbal tics is he calls things top players. That's a top team, a top player. And I'm just thinking, like, did Harry Redknapp narrate the Rosetta Stone he was using when he learned English or something? Because that's a very Redknappian phrase he's using.
I would pay so much money for a Harry Redknapp Rosetta Stone.
Well, I'm going to learn English today, right? Yeah, all right. Yeah, right.
I forget what player he was talking about, but it was a player who didn't speak English like as a native language, and I believe the way he explained it was he don't talk English good. I think or he don't speak the English too good. I think it was Harry Redknapp, just a gem of a human,
dripping in irony.
Hey everybody, Taylor jumping in one last time on this episode to let you know about today's sponsor, The Athletic. I did first want to say Ryan and I have obviously talked about The Athletic quite a few times, the content available there. I really want to make it clear, this is not like a sponsored interview. We're not getting paid by The Athletic to have Ryan on. We're having Ryan on because, one, we love Ryan. Two, we love Ryan's work at The Athletic, so it just made sense. With that said, there is more to be found at The Athletic than just Mr. Bailey making jokes about Man City. You can find Paul Tenorio's excellent coverage. He is breaking stories. He's getting sources. He's got a great one in there today about basically the problem of young Americans moving to European teams for free, and the problem that is causing Major League Soccer and the potential problems down the road that could be exacerbated by this trend. So you've got articles about Premier League teams, about Major League Soccer teams. You've got Paul Tenorio doing his Paul Tenorio thing, but then you've got like cultural side of the game represented as well. For example, there's a great article by Justin Salhani about the response to Mesut Ozil's national team departure, demonstrating why he stepped away. And I found it genuinely fascinating because I am not the biggest fan of Turkey's Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. I did not love Ozil's decision to pose for a photo with Erdogan, so I really did appreciate that the article does kind of criticize him for that decision, but also makes the point that the kind of stress and the drama that resulted is more about Mesut Ozil as a dual national and the issues dual nationals face in terms of identity and the way they're perceived by people on the outside. And I think it's an insight you don't usually get. It's not a way I usually think about soccer players. So again, it's that type of content that really makes me thankful for The Athletic. So if you want to check out those or many, many other options out there, you can go to theathletic.com/TSSAugust, theathletic.com/TSSAugust, all one word, and that will give you a 40% discount off of your Athletic subscription. So you can find that link in the show notes. Thank you once again to The Athletic, as always, for sponsoring today's program. Now back to me and Ryan. The other reason why I wanted to talk with Ryan Bailey today is a slightly more depressing topic of conversation, but here we go.
Oh, God, I know where this is going.
Yeah, so I guess Precourt, whatever they are, Precourt Sports Ventures, they released their possible logo for an Austin franchise, obviously making Columbus fans even more upset than they already were, if that's possible. But I think for a lot of American, like either casual soccer fans or people who are new to soccer, a team moving from one city to another, it's not that uncommon in American sports. It happens pretty often. I think there are 2 Los Angeles football teams right now for some reason. And I think if you look to other American sports as your model, you're kind of looking in the wrong direction. And I think the way I would prefer to think about it is in relation to what's happened with your club, Wimbledon. So that's the other thing. I know you could see this coming. But basically, can you talk about what happened with Wimbledon and take as long as you want?
I'll start off, by the way, by just complaining about the Austin FC logo, the badge. A tree which has roots. Are they trolling? Having like deep roots in a city they've never been in? I don't know.
It's a great question. I had a lot of thoughts about that logo as well.
It seemed like an odd choice of badge to me. But anyway, the badge isn't really important. What's important is what's happening to the club, and it's a travesty. It's what happened to my club, Wimbledon, in the early 2000s. Wimbledon, famously small club Wimbledon, started 100 and something years ago. Always operated on very small budgets, had the likes of Chelsea and Fulham and other big teams in South London around them, taking a lot of fans and a lot of the attention away from Wimbledon. Also quite a big tennis tournament in the area, which takes a lot of fanfare away, arguably. Yeah, you've probably heard of it. Did unbelievable things, climbed up from non-league to the top tier in a matter of years, beat Liverpool, who are the absolute European powerhouse, like beating Real Madrid at the moment in the FA Cup final in 1988. Stayed in the Premier League from when it started until the year 2000, which is pretty incredible. And the departure from the Premier League came at the same time as when the owners were trying to move the club. At this point, the club were playing at Selhurst Park, where Crystal Palace play, because their previous ground had been sold because they argued it couldn't be renovated and updated for the rules for all-seater stadiums. After Hillsborough, they insisted all top-flight stadiums were all-seater. They kind of claimed that they couldn't upgrade the old Plough Lane Stadium. Not so sure about that. It got moved. That was sold and got turned into a supermarket. It's now housing that site. Wimbledon went in this nomadic journey and played in Selhurst Park for many years. And then the owners, as I say, wanted to move. First, there was a plot to move them to Dublin, which would be very controversial because Ireland is not the same country as England. It's a different one. There's an ocean. Or there's at least a body of water between them.
Wait, was that real? They really wanted to move to Dublin?
That was absolutely real. That was a very a mooted project that was very seriously discussed. It got poo-pooed. I think the Premier League weren't very happy about that. They've already got a couple of non-English teams in Swansea and Cardiff.
That sounds like somebody went to Dublin, had a few too many at like the Guinness factory, and was like, you know what? Let's just move it here. Like that feels like a drunk 2 a.m. decision.
I think maybe that's when they broke it down. That's maybe what it came down to. Many of those have been made in Dublin, after all. Those kind of decisions. And then it came along that Milton Keynes. What they claimed was they worked out from the area of Wimbledon in southwest London. They sort of worked out from a radius, like the very closest piece of land where we can build a stadium is Milton Keynes, which is 70 miles away. Meanwhile, several other London teams have had new stadiums built on sites, blah, blah, blah. You don't need to know about that. Arsenal having quite a big new stadium being built in that time. It was all done basically to fulfill a property deal. There was a big property deal going down in Milton Keynes where they built an IKEA, they built a Hilton, all this kind of, awful, god-awful retail park kind of stuff. And they had a stadium there too. So Wimbledon being a team with a small fan base who could make less noise. This is in the pre-Twitter, pre-social media era, by the way. And I firmly believe that if this had all gone down these days, it wouldn't have happened because there would have been such a social uproar about it. But it was a bit easier to get away with when there wasn't so much, exposure across the internet, which back in the early 2000s there was not, unfortunately. So the team got moved. We started a brand new team from the very bottom, called it AFC Wimbledon. I am a shareholder in that team. I'm, part owner, whatever, because we helped start the teams, literally with trials in a local park with amateurs and invited to come along and play. 9 years it took to get back into the league, into the top 4 leagues. I was there, funnily enough, at the Etihad Stadium was where we got promoted to the Football League in 2011.
All right.
Beating Luton in the playoff final on penalties, one of the best days of my life. And, it felt... It was an awful situation to happen, to have your club literally ripped away from you and killed. And I'll say at that point, when they were moved to Milton Keynes, it was promised you'll keep the name. I've got a booklet which they sent to every season ticket holder. We're going to keep the name Wimbledon. We're going to name all the stands after Wimbledon players. The colours will remain the same. Within a few years, they were called MK Dons. They changed the colours. They changed the logo. None of those promises were kept. But by that point we'd started a new team, and as tragic as that is, literally having that club ripped from you. I mean, you can be upset about losing a big game, you can be upset about getting relegated. It doesn't quite equate to the feeling, and that's the feeling that people in Columbus are going through, of having this team you love and the team you've loved all your life and the team that your dad loved all his life ripped away from you, and it's gone. And it can't, it doesn't quite equate to that in soccer. And as tragic as that is, it's been absolutely fantastic having this Phoenix club rise again and go through the same motions of going from the bottom back to the top. We're in League One at the moment, and for a club that's started by fans and funded by fans, it's really, really incredible. And in the beginning of next season, we're playing in Kingsmeadow at the moment, which is Kingstonians' old ground, not too far from Wimbledon. Halfway through 2019, going to be back in Plough Lane, 250 yards from the original stadium site. It was an old Greyhound Stadium which just been knocked down. So back in the same area that the old Wimbledon were, with a team arguably roughly of the same size of the old Wimbledon. It's like we've just done it again, and we've done it ourselves. We didn't do it with any corporate powers or none of the cynical big money stuff. We did it. We did this. And that feels pretty good.
I imagine. And that is an amazing story, and I have more questions. But the thing I found myself distracted by, did you say it was a Greyhound Stadium?
Yeah, so not a stadium made of greyhounds, one where they race greyhounds.
Okay, so that's what I was asking. So, is there still like a racetrack around it, or have they like converted it, or will they convert it into an actual just like soccer specific facility or football specific? Yeah,
so this stadium's been around for years, many decades. They did greyhound racing there. They did stock cars. And Speedway. Speedway is like, I don't know if you have it out here, but it's motorbikes where they don't have any brakes and they go around kind of a dirt track, and it's really dangerous. People die doing it.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds not ideal.
No, it's not. But those, there's people who are, I mean, in the growth of Wimbledon, it's been great, but there's also been some casualties in there. Like, people argue that we've hurt Kingstonian by buying their ground off them, and now Kingstonian don't play there anymore. They can't afford to play there. People have argued that it's our fault. And there are Greyhound fans of Greyhound racing, which is, basically just a bunch of degenerate gamblers who go and watch Greyhounds all day. They're complaining that we've killed their sport because there's not many Greyhound tracks left in the UK anymore. And we kind of say, yeah, okay, that's fair enough, but Greyhound racing is incredibly cruel. It doesn't fit in the 2018 landscape in any way whatsoever, and it's about gambling. It's not really a sport in any other way. So there have been casualties, and that. But to answer your question, this was a Greyhound Stadium which did other kinds of motorsport as well. Literally this week, it was leveled to the ground, and it's now going to be a new stadium built from the ground up.
Ah, there we go. Okay, so not converted. You won't have like a weird track and a rabbit running around it at super fast speeds.
In the years while we were at Selhurst Park, yeah, that's it. In the years while we were at Selhurst Park, there were plans put forward by certain architects to do a kind of solution in that way. Have the track around the outside and have that kind of extendable, movable seating that they have at West Ham now to move in and out and to cover the track. That was an idea they mooted, but then decided Milton Keynes is a much better idea. And now look at Milton Keynes, I can't help but notice that they're in the league below Wimbledon
there
now.
We go.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting?
And I wanted to ask you, not necessarily about their current status, like within their table, but just their status within England, because it does feel like a decision where the owners made it and thought, everybody will get over it. Give it a season. People will be back into it. Wimbledon fans will want a team to cheer for. Everybody will forget about it. And it seems like instead, they're the team that it's just so easy to, they're playing MK Dons, I'm rooting for the other team. It doesn't seem like any of that animosity. I guess it's dipped a little bit, but it doesn't feel like it's gone away. And again, I think that probably pertains as well to what Anthony Precourt is probably going to experience with his Austin franchise.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Wimbledon were always the team that people always used to say, I've got a soft spot for Wimbledon. Just, what they've done. Always the underdog. It was always great when they go far or beat a Man United or, take a Liverpool to the FA Cup final, blah, blah, blah. And that goodwill extended to animosity towards MK Dons, really, because they're always going to be the club that was stolen away. And that's always going to be the way. But at the same point, there is an argument that it will kind of be forgotten in time. I mean, I've made videos on YouTube, complaining about MK, and I've had discussions with young fans who are like, well, MK moved here in 2003. I was a little kid and they were the first team I ever supported. Is that okay? And part of me thinks that kind of is okay, because they were the team when you were they're your local team. At least you're not supporting Spurs. At least you're not supporting Man United. At least you're actually backing your local team and going to see them. But at the same time, no, you're going to hell.
Well, speaking of that harsh approach to things, you're talking about, I have to ask, you're talking about Wimbledon as this lovable team of fun people who accomplish this impossible dream. This is the team that we call the Crazy Gang, right?
Yep.
And this is John Fashanu and Vinnie Jones grabbing people by their nether regions? Yeah,
don't you love it?
I just wanted to make that clear when we talk about this beautiful Cinderella story. And it's just but they also, were kind of ruthless off the field, on the field, I guess.
It was a Route 1 style of soccer, which we, sometimes you see in this game, but not very often these days. And quite physical at times. People, would say we weren't very attractive to watch at times, but it was very, a lot of it was very well thought out and it was very well executed. And, you don't just get to the top of the game by brute force and sheer luck. There has to be some technique behind it. And, Wimbledon were famous for that kind of rough and tumble approach. In my office, I've got the frame photo, which you may have seen. You can find it on Google. Vinnie Jones and Paul Gascoigne.
Oh, yeah.
Vinnie Jones squeezing Paul Gascoigne's nether regions and the look on Gascoigne's face when it's happening. That's some of the antics that will go on. There's stories of John Fashanu, another kind of hard man striker. You'd be in the tunnel of a game and Fashanu and Jones would just walk up and down the opposition, looking every one of them in the eye going, yeah, we got these guys. And you imagine you go to this tiny little stadium with you're in this terrible away dressing room and you've got these two huge guys walking up and down and eyeing you up as you go onto a field. I imagine that's going to affect your performance.
Yeah, I would think so a little bit. It sounds reminiscent. I hope this isn't pouring salt in the wound for Columbus fans, but it sounds like the old Cleveland Browns stadium before they were moved to Baltimore, which was this claustrophobic locker room that was designed to be uncomfortable so that the away teams were just always on edge. And I think it was right next to the most diehard fans section. So yeah, I feel like that would definitely make you a little bit intimidated to go there. And then just being aware of what Vinnie Jones is capable of also maybe makes it slightly intimidating. I do love, he was one who, because I was, 4 in 1988? I can't claim to have much memory of Wimbledon, but Vinnie Jones was the ultimate high school trivia fact of that guy, because everybody watched him in Snatch. I feel like that's when people first discovered him in my age range or my high school friends. And it was always this he used to be a professional footballer. That was always the what? You could blow people's minds with that fact. And now I feel like
really?
It's commonly known. Yeah. So I've lost my one interesting bit of trivia. That's all I have.
Vinnie Jones, quite the character. I remember we used to go and watch Wimbledon train. They were a Premier League team when Vinnie Jones was there. We're talking mid to late 90s. Wimbledon would train in a public park and the dressing rooms were kind of in this kind of just building, just in the public part. People walk in their dogs while a Premier League team were training. That kind of thing doesn't really happen anymore. But you could go and chat with the players and their way in and out from the dressing rooms. At the end of each season, they'd give away all their training kit. Because they'd be getting new ones, new sponsors, blah, 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 for the next season. So you'd always go along to the last training session of the season and try and get stuff. I remember like Robbie Earle walking off the field in just his underpants one time. And that kind of thing would go down. And Vinnie Jones, I remember him there putting in crosses for someone. And I said to him, Vinnie, when you're done, could I have your shirt? He's like, nope.
All right.
Could I have your autograph? No. And then I remember him walking off when he was done with training, and these other girls asked him, and he was like, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, girls. I promised it to someone else. I'm so sorry." And I was like, for years, I was like, Vinnie Jones was nice to those girls when they asked him, but he was horrible to me. And only later did it occur to me that I was distracting him from doing his job while I was asking him for his clothes, while those girls actually waited until he was done. So maybe he wasn't so bad after all.
Yeah, I mean, I have to believe that there are other factors at play there too. I mean, but, maybe Vinnie Jones just wanted to toughen you up a little bit.
Maybe so. And didn't it work?
Yeah, of course. There we are, yeah. Well, I wanted to ask, so you now live in the United States, obviously. Yeah. Is it still strange to you when American franchises move cities, or is it just sort of commonplace now so that it doesn't strike you as odd?
I think it doesn't particularly strike me as odd. I mean, when I've watched or seen American sports teams from afar, it doesn't, you see the Utah Jazz. I don't think there's any jazz in Utah. It's not, it's always just been a thing, hasn't it? And how teams are referred to as franchises, which is a very dirty word in the UK. And there's only one team it's associated with. So no, I don't think it's a surprise. It's very sad, but at the same time, it feels to me, and I'm not gonna label all American sports fans in the same way in any way at all. But when I look at NFL fans, say like I live in Carolina Panthers territory, and when the Panthers went to the Super Bowl, you'd have all these fans who'd moved here from Pittsburgh or Steelers country, moved here from up in New York, who are Buffalo fans or that kind of thing. And suddenly they're diehard Panthers fans. And a lot of people, and I'm not going to tar soccer fans with this brush, but I think a lot of fans in this country, if they move to a new area, will adopt that team. And it's more about the act of supporting and being engaged in sports rather than loving one particular franchise, if that makes sense. So does that make sense at all?
No, it does. It absolutely does. And it is that weird phenomenon. And I think maybe it's because it just makes it easier to be in that city, to feel a part of the city. If you move from DC to Boston, if you put on that Red Sox hat, I feel like it instantly maybe makes you feel like more of a part of the community than continuing to wear your whatever Washington professional franchise hat you might have.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of fan culture here is very different to how it is in Europe. In one way, I think there's a lot of fans like the idea of being a fan just as much as actually being a fan. Like they like tailgating and going to the game and talking with their friends and going to the bar as much as actually sitting down and watching the sport. Like if you're a baseball fan, are you going to watch every single minute of baseball? You can't, can you? No. But you can still engage in the process of being a fan and, putting the shirt on and, tailgating your football team or whatnot. So it's just different. And it's not worse. It's not better. It's just different.
Final question for you, because you mentioned it. Daryl Grove, I think I was with him when he attended his first tailgate, and I think he has sort of come to love tailgates since then. I guess that is a uniquely American thing. Has that been the same for you? Have you grown to enjoy tailgates, or are you still sort of like, let's just get to the game?
I love the tailgating. Now, in watching soccer in Europe, you might go to a pub before a game. Our approach is always just to turn up 10 minutes before kickoff. Yeah. There's no real tailgating culture. And the idea, if you asked a British person, hey guys, like 4 hours before the game, do you want to go and stand in the car park with some warm beer? Do you want to do that? I don't think many people will be up for it. And I think it's different because infrastructure is different. Most people don't drive to games. It's public transport in Europe predominantly. So it doesn't really work in the same way. But, oh man, do I like, I've done college tailgating now. I mean, I've got a friend who goes full out. He's got beer taps in the back of his car. He brings his satellite TV. It's a lot of fun, and it's part of that process I was talking about, of loving the idea of being a fan as much as actual fandom, Whereas, the whole process and the experience of sport is more celebrated here, I think. That's not a bad thing.
No, I don't think so. And I think that's a good note to end on. So, Ryan Bailey, thank you so much for your time. If people want to hear more from you, see more of your writing, what can they do? How can they find you?
They can follow me on Twitter at Ryan J. Bailey, J-A-Y, as in Homer J. Simpson. And all my stuff will be channeled through there.
You managed to get a Simpsons reference and a Futurama reference into one episode. And for that, I love you all the more.
I try my best.
All right. Ryan Bailey, thanks so much again. And we will talk to you soon.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.